Crystal chandeliers blazed above, scattering shards of light across mahogany tables and wine-red velvet chairs. Every laugh was measured, every fork lifted with caution, every breath timed to the rhythm of one man at the head of the room. Victor Kane, the billionaire CEO, the Ice King, a man whose empire stretched across continents and whose temper could end a career with a single look. Tonight, he sat at the long banquet table, glass in hand, surveying the room like a king demanding tribute. Every guest mirrored his movements, too afraid not to. The silence he commanded was absolute. But silence doesn't last forever. And what no one in that glittering hall knew was that it would not be a rival executive who shattered it. Not a board member, not a powerful investor. It would be a waitress, a young black woman balancing a tray against her palm, invisible to the very people she served. And what she did next would not only pierce the silence, it would shake Victor Kane's empire to its very core, because the next sentence out of her mouth would end a legend. This is Black Stories, where the pain of prejudice is told, and justice always finds its voice. If you believe respect can't be bought, and that truth doesn't wear titles, hit like, subscribe, and stay with us as we begin. Because sometimes the smallest voice in the room isn't weak at all. It's the one that ends the empire. Naomi Brooks balanced a tray against her palm, her movements fluid, her posture as straight as if she were carrying the weight of the entire room on her shoulders. To the diners wrapped in silk gowns and $1,000 suits, she was invisible. Just another server in a black uniform. But Naomi carried more than plates and glasses. She carried a history carved in struggle and stitched together by resilience. Her story began far from the marble glow of Victor Kane's empire. In a modest neighborhood on the south side of Atlanta, her father's saxophone filled their tiny apartment with melodies that rose above the hum of traffic and the grind of exhaustion. He wasn't famous, but he was a man who believed music had power, that a single note, bent in the right way, could pierce even the hardest silence. Her mother knew something about silence, too. A nurse who worked double shifts in underfunded hospitals, she returned home each morning with hands cracked from latex gloves, her body aching, but her spirit unbroken. She stitched uniforms by lamplight, cooked meals before collapsing into bed, and reminded Naomi that dignity wasn't about money. It was about how you carried yourself when no one was watching. Naomi listened. She learned. And she dreamed. While other children recited multiplication tables, Naomi devoured books about justice. Court cases fascinated her, not for the drama, but for the way words, carefully chosen, fiercely delivered, could change lives. She imagined herself in a courtroom, standing tall, her father's music in her ears, her mother's strength in her bones, dismantling injustice one sentence at a time. And for a while, it seemed possible. She excelled in school, earned scholarships, even received her acceptance letter to law school. The dream was right there, in her hands. Proof that brilliance could rise from anywhere. Then the phone rang, and everything Naomi planned burned down in a minute. Her father had been performing at a late-night set when his chest tightened. The ambulance came too late. A heart attack stole him from their lives, leaving not just grief, but medical debt piled like bricks on their backs. The scholarship covered tuition, but it didn't cover rent. It didn't cover her mother's prescriptions. It didn't cover the electricity bill when shut-off notices arrived. Naomi watched her acceptance slip through her fingers. She folded away her textbooks, trading case law for menus, lectures for shifts. The law library she longed for was replaced by polished silverware and wine lists. Every plate she carried felt like carrying away a piece of the life she had promised herself. Every tip was a reminder that her dream had been postponed. not erased. But Naomi didn't let the fire die. On smoke breaks, she scribbled notes on the backs of receipts. During long bus rides home, she memorized case law, repeating the words like scripture. While polishing glassware, she trained her ear to listen sharply, not just to what people said, but to what they didn't. On Thursdays, she audited labor law lectures from the hallway, standing after shifts, listening through the door. She became an observer, an archivist of power. She watched how men like Victor Kane controlled rooms without raising their voices. She studied the silences that followed his smirk, the nervous laughter that filled the gaps. And deep inside, she made a vow. When the right moment came, she would not be silent. Because Naomi's conflict was simple, yet crushing. To the world in that dining hall, she was nothing. Just a waitress, but Naomi knew the truth. She was more. She was a woman with the voice of her father, the precision of her mother, and the law inside her like a sword she refused to lay down. And tonight, though no one at that table knew it, the silence she carried would finally shatter. Victor Kane sat at the head of the banquet table like a monarch surveying his court. His silver hair gleamed under the chandeliers, his suit black as midnight, his eyes sharp, calculating. He didn't just occupy space, he consumed it. Every gesture, every pause in his speech drew the room's attention like gravity. And everyone feared him. He leaned back in his chair, a glass of Bordeaux poised in his hand, his gaze fixed on Daniel Ortiz, one of his board members. "Daniel," Victor said smoothly, his voice low, dangerous, "remind me again, what's your role here?" "Other than translating for the janitors?" The table erupted in laughter. Not genuine laughter, the brittle, forced kind, laughter meant to appease a king. Daniel smiled weakly, though his jaw tightened. "I oversee strategy for our Latin American division, sir." Victor raised an eyebrow. "Ah, yes. Strategy. Tell me, Daniel, when the numbers dipped last quarter, was that your strategy too?" The laughter came again, sharper this time. Naomi stood nearby, tray balanced in her palm. She saw the flicker of humiliation on Daniel's face. She recognized it, because she had lived it. A man with brilliance silenced by mockery, his dignity shredded for sport. Celine Ward, Victor's fiancée, decided to add her poison. She swirled her wine glass lazily, her eyes landing on Naomi. "I do love how this place hires their help. Quiet, quick, and invisible." Her smile stretched, thin and cruel. Just how it should be. The table chuckled. A few guests murmured approval, clinking glasses. But in 5 minutes, they'd wish she'd stayed invisible. Naomi set a plate down silently, her face composed. But inside, the words burned. She'd heard them in a dozen different forms. Prejudice wrapped in etiquette, classism disguised as wit, racism smuggled into laughter. Always designed to cut while leaving no mark visible. One guest leaned forward, his voice dripping mockery. "Tell me, Celine, do you think they train them for invisibility? Or is it just natural?" More laughter. Victor smirked, savoring the unease that rippled through the table. He thrived on it. Fear was his currency, and tonight, business was booming. Naomi placed another dish, careful, steady, but her chest tightened. The silence expected of her weighed heavier than the tray in her hand. Victor raised his glass again. "Here's the truth," he declared, voice carrying. "Loyalty isn't earned. It's bought, and fear." He paused, letting the silence stretch. "Fear is the only true respect." The words dropped like stones in water. No one contradicted him. Not a board member, not a guest, not even Daniel Ortiz, whose eyes lowered to his plate. Naomi's lips parted, then closed. She glanced at the man at the head of the table. His smirk, his certainty, the way he wielded silence like a blade. She thought of her father's saxophone, the notes that pierced silence. She thought of the law texts she still studied by dim light, the cases where words dismantled men just like him. And for a split second, she wondered, could she? Should she? Victor leaned toward Selene, his words meant for her, but loud enough for everyone. You know what I admire about this country? He gestured with his glass toward Naomi, who stood only steps away. You can take anyone, absolutely anyone, and make them serve you. The laughter was crueler this time. It bit. It cut. Naomi's chest burned. She could stay silent, as expected. Or she could speak. And as she moved toward the sideboard, balancing the tray against her palm, she heard her mother's voice in memory. Dignity isn't about money. It's about how you carry yourself when no one's watching. Her steps slowed. Her lips parted again. And this time, she didn't close them. Victor's voice carried easily, smooth as polished steel. Of course, he said, gesturing with his glass. Under Section 14, we can terminate any union contract we please. Fear keeps workers in line better than benefits ever will. The table chuckled, sycophantic, nervous, but Naomi's tray trembled just slightly in her grip. Not from weight, from memory. She had studied that statute once, underlining it 3 times in a worn textbook. She knew it as well as her own name. And Victor Kane had just misquoted the law. Her lips pressed together. She could let it pass. Stay silent. Keep her job. Or she could speak. The sword of her father's voice stirred inside her. Naomi inhaled, then exhaled, and spoke. Actually, sir, she said softly, Section 14 only applies if the union fails to meet compliance deadlines. Otherwise, termination is unlawful. The table froze. Forks stopped mid-air. Glasses halted just before lips. Even the violinist faltered, bow dragging across the strings in a discordant squeal. Victor's head turned slowly. His eyes locked on her. Excuse me? Naomi straightened, tray balanced like a shield. You misquoted the statute, sir. And the room realized, for the first time, the Ice King could bleed. A dangerous silence rippled across the room. Selene Ward broke it first with a sharp laugh, tilting her glass. Isn't that adorable? Our waitress thinks she's a lawyer. The guests laughed, brittle, uneasy. Laughter laced with cruelty, designed to cut her down before she stood any taller. Victor leaned back in his chair, smirk curling like smoke. Interesting. Tell me, Naomi. Yes, that's your name, isn't it? Where did you get your law degree? The back of a menu? The laughter was louder this time, desperate, sycophantic. Naomi's chin lifted, her voice steadied. I studied law. And just because I wear an apron doesn't mean I left my mind in the kitchen. Gasps rippled down the table. A woman near the middle covered her mouth. Daniel Ortiz's eyes widened, then flicked down quickly, afraid to show approval too soon. Victor's smirk deepened, but there was a crack in it now. Bold words, he murmured. But you do realize bold words have consequences? Selene leaned forward, venom sweet in her smile. Careful, darling, she cooed. One more slip, and you'll be cleaning tables in a diner by sunrise. Naomi didn't blink. Maybe, but at least I'd be telling the truth. The words struck like a stone hurled through glass. Guests shifted, some stifling, nervous laughs, others whispering. Phones appeared under the tablecloths, screens lighting. Someone was already recording. Victor's fingers drummed against the mahogany. "So you're challenging me." "Here, in front of my board, in front of my fiancé, in front of everyone." Naomi met his stare. "No, I'm correcting you. There's a difference." A collective breath sucked through the room. Victor leaned forward now, his face inches from hers, his voice a quiet blade. "Then prove it. Right here, right now, in front of everyone." The trap was sprung. Naomi's chest rose and fell, steady despite the storm breaking around her. She hadn't wanted this. She hadn't planned this, but the moment had chosen her, and she would not back down. Victor steepled his fingers, eyes glittering like cold steel. He leaned back, his voice cutting through the charged silence. "Tell me then, Naomi," he said slowly, savoring her name like it was an insult. "What does equity mean?" The table leaned in. Some smirked, waiting for her to stumble. Others clutched their glasses tighter, unable to look away. Naomi didn't falter. Her father's voice echoed inside her. "Play the note like you mean it." "Equity," she said, her tone steady, "means fairness. But in law, it's more than fairness. It's the power of the courts to create remedies beyond what's written in the statutes. Equity bends law toward justice." Gasps swept the table. A few guests blinked. One whispered, "She's right." Victor's smirk twitched, just barely. "Clever," he said smoothly. "But anyone can memorize a definition." "Do you know precedent?" Naomi didn't hesitate. "Harris v. Quinn, 2014, she said clearly. "Supreme Court case. Limited the bargaining rights of home health care workers, but the ruling also affirmed that states have the authority to recognize and support their unions. That's precedent." He asked for precedent. She reached for lightning. Forks clattered against plates. A man near the end muttered, "My God!" Another shook his head in disbelief. Victor's face darkened, but Naomi pressed forward. "You misquote statutes because fear shields you from correction, but fear is not respect, and respect cannot be bought." Her voice carried, not loud but precise, each word landing like a hammer on glass. For the first time that night, Daniel Ortiz spoke. His chair creaked as he leaned forward, his eyes locked on Victor. "She's right." The words weren't shouted. They didn't need to be. They cracked the veneer of silence that Victor had built around himself like ice walls. Murmurs erupted down the table. Guests exchanged glances, torn between fear of Cain and awe at the waitress who had dismantled his authority with nothing more than words. Victor's smirk faltered completely now, his jaw tightening. "You think quoting law makes you powerful?" he spat. "You're a waitress, and I—" He slammed his fist against his chest. "I am Victor Kane." Naomi stepped forward, her tray steady as a shield, her chin lifting. "And that is exactly why you're afraid." The silence that followed was thunderous. Someone's phone buzzed under the table. Another hand darted out to record. The violinist stopped playing altogether, bow trembling in mid-air. Victor's face turned to stone. Celine Ward's diamond smile cracked into a sneer. "She's making a fool of you, Victor. End this. Throw her out." But no one moved. Naomi's eyes swept the table. The investors, the board members, the guests who had been too afraid to speak. She saw their fear. She saw their longing for someone, anyone, to pierce the silence they had been drowning in for years. And in that moment, she understood. She wasn't just fighting for herself. She was speaking for everyone who had ever been crushed beneath Victor Kane's shadow. The empire of fear was cracking, and the room knew it. Victor's hand slammed against the mahogany table. Crystal rattled. Wine sloshed over glass rims. The violinist dropped his bow. "Enough!" His voice roared through the dining hall, echoing off the chandeliered ceiling like thunder. Guests flinched, some shrinking into their chairs. Celine's smile sharpened into venom. "Throw her out, Victor, before she embarrasses you further." But Naomi didn't move. She planted her feet, her chin lifted, and when she spoke, her voice was steady, piercing. "You call yourself the Ice King, but your empire is cracking. Everyone here knows it." Gasps shot through the table like sparks. Victor's eyes narrowed, burning holes into her. "Careful," Naomi pressed on. "Debt hidden in your subsidiaries, a pending labor complaint, and tonight everyone here finally saw the truth, that fear isn't loyalty, it's silence, and silence doesn't last forever." Phones lit beneath the tablecloths. Guests weren't just watching now, they were recording. The spell of fear that had bound them for years was breaking. Victor rose, towering over her, his shadow swallowing her in velvet darkness. "Do you know what I do to people who defy me?" His voice was a blade. Naomi stepped forward, close enough to look him in the eye. "Yes, you fire them, you smear them, you try to erase them. But what happens when the person you try to erase refuses to disappear?" The words landed like cannon fire. Celine shot up from her chair, pointing a manicured finger. "She's nothing! A waitress in an apron daring to speak to you like this? She should be on her knees begging for a job, not lecturing you about law." Naomi's gaze shifted to Celine. Calm. Sharp. "I may wear an apron, but at least I don't wear someone else's power like a borrowed crown." The room erupted. Laughter from some, gasps from others. One investor muttered, "God, she's fearless." Another whispered, "She just finished Celine with one line." Celine's face flushed scarlet. "How dare you!" Victor cut her off with a raised hand. "Silence." His eyes never left Naomi. "You think you've exposed me? You think this performance makes you strong?" Naomi's voice rose, carrying over the room. "No, it makes me human. Something you forgot how to be." The words struck like lightning. Daniel Ortiz rose from his chair. His voice was low but firm. "She's right." All heads whipped toward him. Daniel, the quiet board member, the man Victor had humiliated for years, was standing beside Naomi. One crack in the ice became a fault line. Victor's face drained of color. "Sit down, Ortiz." Daniel shook his head. "Not tonight. Not ever again." Gasps, murmurs. Phones angled higher, capturing everything. Naomi turned back to Victor. "Look around you. They're not laughing with you anymore. They're watching, recording, sharing. Your power doesn't scare them now. It disgusts them." Victor's fury boiled over. He lunged forward, but the security detail hesitated. Their eyes darted, uncertain. For years they had obeyed his every order, but tonight the tide had turned. Instead of grabbing Naomi, two guards stepped between Victor and the room, not to protect him, but to contain him. The Ice King, caged by his own men. The dining hall trembled with applause, swelling louder and louder. Some clapped cautiously, others pounded the table. The sound rose like a verdict delivered by the very people Victor thought he controlled. Victor's chest heaved, his silver hair disheveled, his hands clenched. But for the first time in decades, he stood powerless. And across from him, a waitress in a black uniform held the room in the palm of her hand. The moment Victor Kane's guards stepped between him and the crowd, the spell was broken. Phones tilted higher. cameras flashed. The applause from inside the dining hall spilled out into the night like a storm breaking glass. By the time Victor stormed toward the exit, his silver hair wild, reporters had already gathered outside. They hadn't been invited. They didn't need to be. Whispers from waitstaff, frantic texts from junior investors. It had all traveled faster than wine poured. The headlines began before dessert was cleared. The Ice King shattered, CEO humiliated in viral showdown. Waitress stands up to Victor Kane, crowd erupts. Empire of Fear melts in real time. Clips from the confrontation flooded every corner of the internet. Naomi's voice, sharp and steady. Fear is not respect, and respect cannot be bought. Daniel Ortiz rising to stand beside her. Celine shrieking. Victor lunging, restrained by his own guards. The public ate it up. Comments blazed under the videos. She ended him with words. She's braver than the whole board combined. Respect isn't bought, it's earned. With each share, Victor's power thinned, and the stock market did what fear never could. It spoke back. By dawn, his company's stock had dipped 12 points. Reporters camped outside Kane Tower, demanding statements. Former employees came forward with their own stories of humiliation, tales of firings, lawsuits, threats. What had been whispered for years now spilled into daylight. And through it all, Naomi's name spread. Not the waitress, not the help, but Naomi Brooks, the woman who had shattered the silence around Victor Kane. She became a symbol. Morning shows wanted her. Universities reached out. Law firms offered scholarships, mentorships, contracts. But Naomi remained grounded. When a reporter shoved a microphone in her face and asked if she had planned to humiliate Victor Kane, her answer was simple. I wasn't trying to humiliate anyone. I was tired of fear winning. Meanwhile, Victor's empire buckled. Lawsuits surfaced. Investigations reopened. Shareholders whispered about replacing him. Celine Ward, once the queen beside the king, found herself mocked in tabloids. Photos of her shrieking while Naomi stood calm became the visual of the scandal. The Ice King's legend melted. And in its place rose another story of a woman in a waitress uniform who refused to disappear when silence was demanded. And the world noticed. Victor Kane vanished from the dining hall that night, but his shadow didn't leave with him. It lingered in legal complaints, headlines, and boardrooms suddenly braver in his absence. Within weeks, the Ice King's empire cracked open. Investors pulled out. Partners severed ties. A pending labor case, citing the very loopholes Naomi had exposed. What Victor once wielded as power now turned into evidence stacked against him. Celine Ward didn't escape either. The image of her shrieking while Naomi stood calm went viral. Tabloids replayed it endlessly. Her designer gowns couldn't cover the cracks. Invitations dried up. Her name became shorthand for arrogance cloaked in silk. But where fear collapsed, dignity rose. Daniel Ortiz, once silenced by Victor's cruelty, stepped into leadership. He championed reforms Victor had crushed, fair labor practices, transparency, protections for workers silenced too long. The same boardroom that once laughed at Victor's jabs now applauded Daniel's voice. And Naomi, she folded her apron one last time, placing it on the counter like a closing chapter. She didn't leave in shame. She walked out with her head high, flanked by support she never imagined. End of shift. Start of story. Law schools called. Scholarships were offered. Journalists asked for interviews. Yet Naomi's answer remained the same. I only did what was right. Her father's voice echoed in her memory, saxophone notes curling through smoky bars. Voice is soul. And now, Naomi had found hers, not in silence, not in fear, but in courage. Fear had fallen. Dignity had rebuilt. Everyone feared Victor Kane. But fear only lasts until someone dares to break it. Naomi Brooks proved that courage doesn't wear titles, and dignity doesn't hide in uniforms. It lives in choices, the kind that risk everything in a single breath, in a single word, in a single act of defiance. The Ice King believed silence was loyalty. He believed money could buy respect. But in the end, all his billions couldn't stop a waitress from dismantling his empire with nothing but truth. And that's the lesson that echoes beyond chandeliers and boardrooms. Power built on fear will always collapse. But power built on respect, that endures. Because empires don't fall to armies. They fall to truth said out loud. So if this story moved you, share it and hit subscribe. Because silence feeds fear. But stories like this remind us that courage belongs to everyone. And maybe the next time someone tries to make you small, you'll remember Naomi's voice, steady, unshaken, cutting through fear like light through glass. I refuse to disappear.